So welcome everyone to the Demystifying AI Ethics Roundtable discussion. Thank you so much for spending a lunch hour with me to talk about this subject today. I think it's a really important one. For those of you that are new, I'll just let you know, this is really an open discussion. We're going to do breakouts and jump in and have conversations with each other about different aspects of our topic today, which is creative and intellectual property versus fair use. What is going on in this world? What are the debates? What is being discussed? I feel like this is a big issue for a lot of people that are in creative professions, for people who are artists, musicians, but also even people who are doing programming and development. They also fall kind of into this category of intellectual property, right? IP. So as usual, I've put together a slide deck, which I'll share afterwards, which has a ton of links, just a ton of information. It's kind of like a little ebook study guide you can take home with you. I'll also be recording this today, and usually in the next 2 days, I get the recording processed and I send it out to everyone. So that way you can go back over it if you want. You can look at the slide deck and click on some of the resources. You can also share it with people in your community, share it with people at your job, whatever it is. I really want to invite everyone to share this as they see fit because it's such an important topic. And as we go through, like I said, I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then we're going to jump into a breakout, discuss with everybody else what our thoughts and ideas are. Then we'll come back into the room and we'll sort of review another topic area and then go back into the breakouts again. So most of you know me, but just in case you don't, I'm Sarah Benoit. I'm the co-founder and lead instructor of the JV Media Institute. And I really wanted to start this AI ethics conversation quite honestly, because I am both scared and overwhelmed and excited and thrilled and just kind of all over the place with this topic. And I just feel like every day I'm having to learn something new. And if I'm in a silo, it's just hard to even process all the different questions that come up. So really quick to start us off, I just wanted to highlight what intellectual or creative property is. Essentially, this really just has to do with, I love the way they literally legally define it, creations of the mind. So, that's something that up until, the last few decades has been uniquely human, but is becoming more and more part of, in some ways, what machines are doing. So creations of the mind, artistic works, inventions, symbols and names, designs, all of these things fall under intellectual or creative property. And the laws that we already have in place with copyrights and trademarks and patents, they really were created with this idea that we needed to balance innovation with protection. So we want to be able to expand our view, create new things, try new things, learn from others, put it into the work that we're doing. But we also really want to recognize people that do the work to create something that's completely new. And I find it interesting when you delve into this topic of intellectual property and creative property. This is something that can be argued all the way to the Constitution, right? So there's a reason copyright laws, patent laws, trademark laws are so old. This is something that came up a long, long time ago, long before technology. So that's where I think we're dealing with this very interesting situation with policies and law, because there's all sorts of precedents, but none of them quite fit what's going on at this point. And as you can see, just with copyright, when we consider original works of authorship, from a legal perspective, it's drawings, it's fabric designs, it's photographs, it's sculptures, it's architectural plans, it's musical scores, it's motion pictures, right? And film and video and DVDs, it's choreography, it's stage plays, it's computer programs, it's source code. So this is a really big conversation that's hitting almost every industry. And, IP or intellectual property, I think really covers creative property, right? And creative property is so wide and broad. So again, we end up with a lot of gray areas. We end up with old precedents, but we end up with legal situations that have never happened in the span of humanity until recently. So to me, it just creates a really interesting conundrum as we dig into this. So the first breakout that I want you all to go in, and you'll have about We'll start with about 10 minutes to have this conversation because you're going to be in larger groups. But I'd love for you to share with folks what kind of intellectual creative property matters to you, right? Are there things that you want to protect that you've created? If so, what is that? Or feel free to come from the perspective that you actually don't care. You don't want to protect anything. You're here for the Wild West and the free for all, right? Some of people, that's really how they feel. And I don't think there is anything wrong with that. But there will probably be 4 or 5 people in each room. So like I said, give each other about 2 to 3 minutes just to share. Is there things that you want to protect? What do you consider your creative or intellectual property? And those rooms are open. Welcome back. And I'm just going to start a second poll just so you guys can sort of share with me what you kind of talked about. So just curious, are you worried about protecting anything, right? Is that on your radar right now, or is it something that you're not worried about? And again, if you can't see the poll, there should be a link in the chat you can go to add the town hall app if you'd like to. You can also answer in the chat if you don't have the poll available. But next, I want to talk a little bit about just the different levels of protection that we already have. When you really dig into where this sort of AI argument is happening, you really find that it comes down to, like I said, these things that already exist, that are already part of our law, especially the patents, copyrights, and trademarks. I think they are, like the biggest parts of the conversation right now, and the things that most people are more aware of. I will just say that right now, if you've never registered your copyrights for different things, it might be a great time to do that. Copyrights are innate, you get them whether you register for them or not, but certainly from a legal perspective, the people who have registered their copyrights have a stronger legal leg to stand on, per se, in the conversation. Trademarks and patents, of course, have always been a bigger process. And so, those processes often take time. A lot of times you need attorneys, you need money to pay fees and things like that. And so if you have already gotten these types of things, I think they are really key to, again, protecting your intellectual and creative property going forward. Although, like I said, there's still a lot of gray area. So what is the gray area? The gray area is what we call fair use. Right now, if you look at the US Copyright Office, they're actually putting out a lot of great information about this topic, because they know people are interested and concerned, and they're really spending their time answering questions and putting out content on a regular basis about this. But essentially, there's always been, especially in the time of the internet, this idea that there's certain uses of different copyright protected material that is okay, right? So usually fair use is like if you want to criticize something, comment on something, like as an influencer or blogger, if you want to do news reporting, if you're teaching, you're doing research, if you're in the comedy world, right? It's okay to use copyrighted materials like clips of videos and movies and different things like that, right? And it's interesting because factual works tend to be less protected than creative works. So if I'm just reporting basic facts, that is, that's sort of like open to fair use, wide open. When I'm creating things, there's a little bit more interpretation there to dig into. But essentially with fair use, when this question comes up, I will just say OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, they are like absolutely training our models is fair use, 100%. They like came out of the gate making that claim right away. They're going to argue it in every case that comes to them. And they've been getting sued by everybody, which is really interesting. And there's sort of 4 main areas with fair use where we're, like I said, asking deeper questions. So the character and purpose of the AI use, right? So this really comes down to when it comes to protected works that are being used to train AI, right? Is there a point in which the purpose or character of how the AI is using what you've created, does it fit into some of the fair use exceptions, right? And so are things commercial or a nonprofit, or are they educational, right? So there's all these kind of factors we look at as just like, what is the reason why the AI is training on what you created, right? And there may be some exceptions there when it comes to what is defined as fair use versus not. The second factor that the courts are really digging into is the nature of the copyrighted work, right? So again, is it factual or creative? If the underlying work is more creative, like a song that you wrote or a painting that you painted or something like that, it's going to potentially have more weight as a fair use argument. The third thing is the amount and substantiality of what was used. So how much of the original work got used to train the AI? Was it a super small percentage, or was it the whole thing? That's going to affect what the legal answer is to the question. And then the last thing is the impact on the value and the market of the protected work. So again, if I've got something that's already protected by copyright or other things, if what the AI is doing is really impacting my ability to value my work, make money from my work, sell my work, that's an issue, right? We would argue that it doesn't fall under fair use if it's impacting somebody in that way. So these are kind of like the four things that we're seeing coming up in the legal arguments, right? Of just this question, does AI training in large language models and other types of artificial intelligence, does that all fall under fair use or not? And I love the OpenAI tried to say it totally does. There's no question here. We're all good. That was, I guess, a good commitment and effort on their part to advocate for themselves. But I think when we look at the actual factors involved, fair use was never that cut and dry, and it's less cut and dry because of AI, right? So I'm curious if you could share with each other. Let's take about 5 minutes for this next one. But what do you think about the fair use argument, right? Do you think OpenAI has a point? And if it's out on the web, it's fair game. And in their mind, the AI isn't going to impact you. That's their argument, right? It's not impacting your bottom line. It's okay if they didn't, if they used certain amounts of things. If it was for something more educational, less commercial, then it's more valid, right? So they're really trying to push everything in that direction. So I'm going to go ahead and recreate these breakout rooms. So you might meet some new people. And those should be open. All right, again, welcome back. Thanks for, again, sharing with everyone in your groups. So we're going to jump back into me sharing my screen here. And what I'd like us to do while we talk about this next section before we go into the last breakout is I want you to really, I know sometimes we're doing different things while we're in this session, but maybe just pay attention. If you have a notebook or your phone, you might want to write a couple of these down for the conversation in the next breakout. But really, what are the issues or the questions that are facing artists and creatives? And again, I include programmers and coders and all sorts of people in this group because I feel like a lot of us are creating original work. So there's kind of three buckets of problems I feel like a lot of the creative communities across the country are talking about. The first problem is AI replication and artistic identity. So if AI can just replicate what you create, whether it's music, art, code, whatever it is, right? And then we can ask the AI to just generate and imitate different styles of things. Are we diluting the original work, right? So are we affecting the uniqueness of somebody's work through that? So that's one big question there that I think is important. And hey, Cade, no problem. I'll share the recording. So if you want to finish up, you can watch the rest of it. The other thing is income displacement. So again, related to if we dilute the originality and the uniqueness, how does that actually affect the artist's work and what it's worth and how it's valued and what happens when you sell? The second sort of bucket of problems is just the copyright complexity in AI art. And I'm going to give you some references at the end about different cases you can go and read about that have already been happening. But essentially, it's just there's so much complexity around if we can create artwork with AI, what does that mean to copyright? Things like copyright, trademark, all of these things have really historically been only assigned to human beings. So we're struggling with what does this mean? Not just how does it impact our copyrights from AI training, but what does it mean if artists start using AI and what is copyrightable? When we do that process, right? So as we're integrating things, we want to be thoughtful about this, whether we're visual artists or writers or musicians, whatever it is, right? And then the law is way behind where the conversation is. So that's a big issue for artists because we're attempting to make decisions when there's no like legal policies that are really reliable. Things are kind of muddy water, things are changing all the time. And so we'll talk about some resources for getting more involved in that as well. But again, just the complexity of the copyright issues is a huge bucket of problems that are being discussed. And the last potential problem is the loss of control. So, in our last session, we talked about kind of AI models and what they are and why they need to be explainable, and we need to be able to really understand them. One of the biggest things about AI is how much data they have to be trained on. So there's these huge, vast data sets that are actually how the AI models are learning. And because of that, it's like even for artists and creatives who want to kind of take a stand around this, it's really hard for them to even know if stuff is being used without their permission. There's just like sort of a loss of control because of the way that we have had very little data security and privacy protections in the United States. So again, the European Union is a little bit ahead of us on what it means to protect people's data. In the US, we're a little bit loosey-goosey with all that, legally speaking. And so lots of different companies get access to huge amounts of data. And then also, if an artist's work is used to generate other art through AI that's very different or controversial, how is that impacting their image, right? And the public perception of what they do. And I will say, as a marketing person, this I think is an incredibly important question for people who make their money and have built their brand on their personal image and their work. It's like if anybody else can kind of take it and run with it, how do you protect kind of your values? How do you stay values aligned? How does your work stay values aligned in some way? So in our last breakout, I want you to see if you can sort of talk about, are any of these problems things that stand out for you, right? Or things that you see could be really an issue. The reason I want us to sort of identify where we get most connected in is because if I'm honest with you all, there's so many problems. Thanks, Mike. There's so many problems going on that you're not going to be able to solve all of them or talk about all of them. You're going to have to figure out kind of which bucket do you want to gravitate towards first. So is it the loss of control? Right? That you don't really know what's happening with your work. You don't really know how it's being used or who's going to use it to create something else. Is it just this copyright issue, the complexity of that is something that you feel is a key problem that has to be addressed? Or is it really that you feel like your identity might get diluted or the identities of people you know that are in the creative fields would get sort of diluted and it would affect their ability to make money? Or maybe it's all of these things. So what problems do you think are going to impact you most? Or are there things that you feel are more concerning than others? And I'm going to recreate these rooms. And we've got a little smaller group, so we're going to take about 7 or 8 minutes for this. And I have opened them. All right, welcome back. So I will say I appreciated everyone who could doing the poll. I really liked that, some people, we were at like a 50-50 split of who's worried versus who's not. And I think that's a really great example of why it's important to really understand, with AI, there's all these different issues, which issues really matter to you and are the most important because we're never going to run out of issues. And for me, it's interesting because I feel like I'm a creative professional, but I've never considered myself an artist. So I'm in marketing, right? So I do design, but I'm not a designer. I have, built websites, but I wouldn't really say I'm a web developer, right? So I kind of touch on all these creative projects. And what I've realized is I might be more flexible about what kind of happens with my work, but I work alongside all of these really amazing creative and artistic people that I think have more questions about this and more thoughts about it. So that's why I think it's a really good idea to keep talking to the people that you know about these subjects. In the slide deck that I'm going to share, I've just included a section on kind of the fact that this is like a really wild kind of space for us all to be in because there's no answers to the questions. We're kind of discovering the answers together. And one of the things that we really can do at this point is actually be involved in the policy making, in the initial conversations, stepping into leadership in our industries around different things that matter to us. There's a great Harvard Business Review article. I'm a big fan of them, where they just talk about how the courts are really in the middle of trying to establish, like I said earlier, how we're going to evolve these old laws and policies to incorporate something that obviously the founding fathers that were involved in some of the creation of these laws and policies, they never, I think, would have imagined what we're kind of trying to work with. There's also all sorts of lawsuits in action right now that have been happening that are setting precedent as we go. So as we have these conversations, we make decisions, we try to do the best to protect ourselves and our work and the people around us. Also, like the legal tone of everything is just literally being created in the moment. And there's lots of big arguments between big companies. So New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft. Getty Images was suing Stable Diffusion. The Getty Images situation is really interesting because as they sued Stable Diffusion for using their images, they also launched their own AI image generation part of their system. So they're like, we're going to start using AI while we sue you for training stuff, training your AI with our imagery. The Associated Press just struck a deal with OpenAI around news sharing and what that means. And even newspaper, digital, and magazine executives are coming together now to lobby Congress to really have conversations about the copyright protections of their work, how that's going to be preserved. And like I said, there's also the Copyright Office for the United States has already said copyright will not be applied to AI generated art and work, right? So if you're actually using AI as an artist to generate certain things, you really want to become aware that there's no clear definition about when it's really yours and you can automatically have the copyright, and when you've used enough AI that you no longer qualify for the copyright. And this has been a really interesting case, or if you click on these links, you can just dig into how Judge Howell discussed this and kind of where we're at with it. But that's another thing I think as creatives, if we want to have copyrighted work, whether it's written or visual or musical or whatever it is, we want to be careful we haven't touched into AI tools so much so that we would take away our ability to have that right. Also, of course, the American Federation of Musicians and the Screen Actors Guild have been at the front of all of this, not just talking about laws and policies, but actually nailing down contracts for how they get protected. Of course, the contracts that a lot of them worked on aren't really valid after about 3 years. So there's going to be renegotiations down the road. But we're seeing all, again, creative industries kind of come into this conversation. And then, interestingly enough, the Elvis Act, or what they're calling in Tennessee, the Ensuring Likeness, Voice, and Image Security Act, Tennessee was the first state to pass a law protecting creatives and artists in the music industry, basically saying that, since there's no federal laws, we're going to create our own. And we're going to say that we have to be able to protect a musician's vocal likeness, that we have to ensure that AI tools can't just reproduce artists' voices without clear consent, and that people who are publishing and performing without an artist's consent to mimic them in some way, that they can be sued in the state of Tennessee, right? So a big part of Nashville was all very involved in putting this forward from a state level. So how can we actually just do something about this? Again, I always remind everybody, these are huge topics that are in motion while we're working to understand them. So it's basically a learn as you go situation. So to me, everyone's going to have different ways that they want to plug in. A sort of larger way that we can all plug in is the Generative AI Copyright Disclosure Act. So this was actually a bill introduced to the Congress. It forces AI companies to reveal copyrighted material that they are using to generate their AI models. And so they would have to submit copyrighted works that are being used in their training data sets. And they'd have to really be aware of who has registered copyrights and who doesn't. And I think in a lot of ways, in my mind, I have to say, I still need to dig a little bit more deeply into all the details of the bill. But what I appreciate is I think these, and this is just my personal opinion, I think these rich tech companies should be the ones doing it. I don't think the burden should be on creators and artists and creative professionals. I feel like these companies are set up with huge departments. Why shouldn't they be able to pay attention to what part of their data sets are copywritten versus not? If you are a creative artist in some way, you can actually complete a form to say to OpenAI that they are not allowed to train their GPTs on your work. And there's a bunch of steps involved, but it is an open form that you could click on that link right there, and it'll walk you through the process of how you opt out. And you can really submit things to them to say, if this is involved in your data sets, you have to remove it because I have a legal right. It belongs to me. You don't get to do that. So they have at least opened up a step. I think it's a little bit cumbersome step, but it's better than no steps at all. If you have not heard of Nightshade and Glaze, these are amazing tools being created by a bunch of folks at the University of Chicago. These are like platform systems, softwares that basically poison the AI models when they try to train off you. So Nightshade is interesting because what happens is essentially it'll deter the models when they're trying to train. So if it's like ignoring your copyrights, your opt-out lists, or any sort of directives you've put on your website code to say, don't scrape this, essentially what happens is it like scrambles the brain of the AI that's training. So, basically the example they use is if you prompt and say, I want an image of a cow flying in space, instead of that, you might get a handbag flying in space. So it's like Nightshade is literally a piece of software that's combating the AI as it tries to train on your information. And they also created a system called Glaze, which does something similar, but the way that it's different is rather than the AI model coming in and touching your content and disrupting it that way, it actually disrupts the mimicry. So it makes it so that if you have created some different types of visuals and content and the AI models come in and try to mimic it, it'll like scramble the brain of the model as it trains, and it won't allow it to mimic. So I find this fascinating that university students are already digging into how do we make programs and software that come right up against those AI tools and push them back. Right. Yeah, April, exactly. I know I don't use the techie language sometimes. I'm like, scramble the brain of the AI. But it's learning. So it's interesting how you can do that. Also, I think most importantly, and this is why I created these events, I think this is what we can do. We can connect with other people. We can have places to go and have these conversations. We can see what other artists and creatives are doing. If we see people that are creating different types of work that is similar to ours, we can ask questions of them. We can really go to our industry leaders, our industry associations, as well as our own company and organizational leaders, and really say, we have to be talking about this. We can't just start implementing AI tools and letting it kind of take over our lives without really understanding what we're doing. There's a lot of collectives right now for creative people, regardless, whether you're in visuals, whether you're in music, whether you're in writing, to join kind of collectives and really lobby all levels of government. So state, local, federal, really saying we have to start having policy conversations because this stuff is already happening and there's no legal kind of format for it. You can set Google alerts to get information about different things in your industry. There's some great petitions I've linked to. I love the Human Artistry campaign. If you haven't checked them out, I think they're, again, a great bigger level organization. The Center for Art Law has been super helpful to me. Yeah, in April, I'll send out a recording and a copy of the slides in the next 2 days. And also the Scientific American podcast, they did a great episode about this. But I think it all comes down to advocating and listening, right? Making sure that we've got many, many people's voices in the mix and that we really advocate for our own perspectives and our own work, and that we come together with others as well. So as we wrap up, the question is, what next, right? What's one step that you can take to go forward and be involved? And again, you might decide that this particular issue of AI isn't something that you want to plug into, but there's many other issues I'll be talking about this year that you can plug into. But feel free to share in the chat if you think there's something you've gotten inspired to take a step forward on. What is that thing that you'd want to, to do? And again, we're going to have another one of these next month. I appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to launch one final poll if you want to answer on your way out, just about whether or not you think this fair use intellectual property conversation is something you'll want to explore more. But again, I really appreciate everyone spending their lunch hour. I will definitely reach out to everyone with the recording and slides, and I will also invite you, if you haven't signed up already, to join us for some other topics in the future. But for those of you who are signed up for the whole list of them, you'll get reminders from me about our next event in June. But again, thank you all for taking the time. And like I said, feel free to share this information with anyone who can use it.
Thank you.
Great to see you in April. That's a great question. And I'm glad you brought up the conference. There is a great AI summit for those of you who are still on the line. I'll actually send this in an email. It's going to be happening the end of the month. And yeah, April, I'll think about that on the 30th. Is there a way we could have a conversation, about this? Maybe I'll bring that to Steve and mention it. I will definitely be there all day, so I'm down for a conversation, which would be great. Thank you so much. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, have a great rest of your day, everybody. Great to see you, Jake.
Good to see you.